And welcome back to Chicago Bulls Insider. Today we're talking about Nikola Vucevic and if he will be traded, if he'll be bought out, or if he will be staying with the Chicago Bulls this upcoming season. Next, we're going to be talking about Ayo Dosunmu and the most recent trade talk buzz around him. And so before we jump into it, I first want to remind you to slam dunk on that subscribe button, just like Modest Vazelis slam dunks in games. And so in exchange for slamming on that subscribe button, I'm going to give you nothing but daily content around the Chicago Bulls. Make sure that you hit that like, you hit that subscribe, and you join the Chicago Bulls Insider family as we talk nothing but Chicago Bulls basketball. And so with that being said, let's go ahead and let's jump into it. And let's start with Nikola Vucevic here. And so we're looking at if he will be traded, bought out, or stay with the Bulls here. And so I'm going to start with the least likely, and then I'm going to work my way down from there. So starting with the least likely, I think that it's least likely that we see Nikola Vucevic bought out. I just don't think that this is something that is going to be really a realistic option. Now, I'm not saying that it cannot happen. Anything can absolutely happen in anything. And so with that being said, when it comes down to a buyout, I just don't see the Chicago Bulls going ahead and paying Nikola Vucevic to either go home or to go to another contender. And in fact, in today's episode of the Fast Break with KC Johnson, he actually throws a little bit of cold water on the bought out situation. In fact, he talked about the fact that it seems to be this is something that has been aggravated a lot. And he says that he just doesn't see this happening in his personal opinion there. And so, that's KC Johnson, the Bulls insider saying that, and I'm right there with him. I think that just the likelihood of Vooch going anywhere with a buyout is just not going to happen. I think that when you look at Vooch and his productivity and what he can bring to a basketball team, I think that you're probably more likely to see one of the next two scenarios here. And so when we start to look at the next scenario, which I think is next up, it's going to be, will Nikola Vucevic be traded? And so I think that there is a possibility, and I think that there is a high likelihood. I just don't know if it's going to happen during the season, because there's obviously going to be a lot of talk around Vooch and him being traded. And rightfully so, because I get it. Vooch is older, but when you look at Vooch and you look at the productivity that he had a season ago, you will see a player that was not only a walking double-double, but you're seeing a player that also shot his best field goal percentage there at 53%. And he was right there at the 40.2% from downtown. And so I know that Vooch definitely struggles on the defensive end, but man, Vooch offensively, what he can still bring to a contender out there, I think that there has to be a market for that. And so going back to KC Johnson and just his Fast Break show, one of the things that he mentioned here is that, look, the Bulls notably were shopping Vooch last trade deadline. Ultimately, they could not find a trade partner. We had heard the noise around the Golden State Warriors, and that really fell through. But he's like, look, the Bulls ultimately would want to turn his contract into an asset. And I do think that that is probably what the thinking is with the front office. And I think that Vooch is poised to have a solid year, if not a better year, because Vooch actually really went out last season and showed out in a way, because I think a lot of people were thinking that with this new system, this up-tempo style of play, perhaps Vooch was going to take a step back, talking about the team really pivoting, to really more of a youth movement. And Vooch was right there with these guys. I mean, he was getting up and down the floor. He was effective as far as scoring the basketball. And in my personal opinion, I think that when the Bulls needed a bucket in the half court, they could go to Vooch. I think that they kind of got away from that. And I think at times that's where Lonzo Ball was huge for this team, because, we'd get up and down the floor, look to shoot these three-pointers and play fast and everything else. But there were times where Vooch would have the mismatch and he would get the ball to him to go to work. And I think that this team is still going to have to utilize Vooch that way. And so I do think that the offensive system is going to take off, but I do think that Vooch is really going to find his way in year two here, because you have to look at this thing from a totality. And I think that continuity is going to be there for a lot of these players. I think defensively, they're going to be a lot better than they were last year. And I'm talking about the players who got a chance to play in this system. Remember, we saw a bit of the zone coverage and stuff like that. So I can I expect for the defensive coverages and things like that to be a lot better with what they're trying to execute there. And offensively, I think you understand a little bit more with what you're trying to do with this spacing and pace and everything like that. Because remember, everything was new. They were playing with a shorter shot clock in training camp and all that stuff like that. So now, instead of kind of thinking through it, it's going to become a bit more second nature. And so you can expect for Vooch to be locked in. I loved how he came back after shooting just 29% from downtown. And Vooch, he's always been the professional. And so I'm saying that to say this. I think that it's likely that we see Vooch traded before he's bought out. However, I'm not sold on the fact that he's going to be traded at the trade deadline. And so this goes into my theory, and I've said this already on numerous shows. I think that when we look at Vooch and what is possibly going to happen with a trade, I think that Vooch is going to sign a team-friendly deal, much like Lonzo Ball did. And I think it's going to be something where it has a team option. And with this contract, because it's tradable, I think he's going to get moved. And I think it's going to be something of a 1-for-1 swap. That's just my personal, just throwing it out there, I think is going to happen because the Bulls, their last couple trades, they've been 1-for-1 swaps. You look at the Alex Caruso situation, there was no picks involved. You look at Lonzo Ball and that move, there were no picks involved. And then with Vooch, I think that this is going to be a situation where you are simply going to get a player back. Now, I'm not saying that I would want to see that. I do think that Vooch should at least command a second-round pick. I think that the first-round pick situation, that window, that ship has sailed. But a second-round pick, I think that Vooch absolutely commands that. Will the Bulls be willing to go ahead and move off that? I'm not sure. And I say that because they had a chance to move Lonzo for some picks, and they could have, went ahead and moved him, but they did not. And so they chose to wait until the offseason, and then they moved him for a player. And so I think that Vooch gets to a contender, and I think it is more of a 1-for-1 swap here. But you guys let me know in the comments, do you think that Vooch is going to be traded? Is he bought out? Is he going to stay with the Bulls? Remember, he's coming in at about $21.5 million this season, 18.5 points per game, 10.1 rebounds. So talking about that double-double, 80.5 from the free throw line. Talked about his field goal percentage at 53%, which was actually a best, and then 40.2% from three, which was one of his best from downtown, and a guy that has been extremely durable. And then just throwing this lastly out there, just thinking about teams that could possibly want him, I think about the Pacers. I think about the Celtics. I think the Golden State Warriors would be interested. The Lakers would be interested. The Hornets are not a contender, but I do think that they could use a big man as well. And so anyway, you guys let me know in the comments what you're thinking there. Next, shifting quickly focus over here to Ayo Dosunmu. And so give me a little bit of an update around him. And so this comes via the fast break as well. And so Casey Johnson talked about this. And so by the way, 10 minutes and 54-second mark if you want to hear about this Ayo Dosunmu news and him talking about this. But here's what he said, because he gives us an update because he last gave us one where he said that there was more chatter around Ayo Dosunmu than it was around Kobe White. And so he said that largely that trade talk has died down, and he does expect for Ayo Dosunmu to be back here with the Chicago Bulls. And he said that the Bulls had talks with a Western Conference playoff team well earlier in the offseason. And he said that the two teams could not find common grounds on a trade package, and all signs point to him returning. And so Ayo said that he did, or excuse me, Casey Johnson said he spoke with Ayo at Vegas, and he said that he's ahead of schedule. He's looking to ramp up for 5-on-5 contact here coming up here in August. He mentions that he was over in Spain doing some work here with some other NBA players. And he was talking about the fact that Ayo Dosunmu has always found his way into the rotation. And that, look, this is a fluid situation because the guards on the Chicago Bulls and that situation, it is crowded. And so we've said that several times on this show. And so, anything can happen here with the possibility of a trade, maybe materializing down the line. But I've said this before. I'm not in the camp of trading Ayo Dosunmu, and I do think that Ayo could really have a major role for this team. And I'm not even talking about offensively. I think that because the system is set up the way that it is, where they're trying to get up and down the floor, and Ayo has really been a one-man type of fast break, I think that he is going to be set to really increase his numbers offensively in that way and just not have to dominate the basketball. Not saying that he does, because he can really fall into being a natural point guard at times, but I do think a lot of the points can come for him and you don't have to run an offensive set. But defensively, I think that that's really going to be the calling card for Ayo Dosunmu, because I'm not betting on Patrick Williams. And to be honest with you, I think between him and then you have Isaac Okoro, I think that those two guys are going to wreak havoc. And I think that he has a real chance to get a ton of steals off ball. I think that he can be an irritant on ball for us and be very switchable. So I think that because of that, from a personnel standpoint, Billy Donovan's going to give him some opportunities. And Ayo has really been a guy that I think for the most part, when he's been healthy, I think he's had some ups and downs and things like that, but I bet on this guy more than I bet on a lot of other guys on the team. And so I think that Ayo is going to find a way. And going back to some of the things that he said before, this is a guy that wants to start. And so he's going to come in with that. And I love the fact that not only does he want that, he's also a guy that I think has really become a leader for this team and gives this team a bit of an identity. And so talking about just leadership too, before we jump out of here, shout out to him. And so one of the things that was mentioned here is that he also was doing his block party charity event as well there at Union Park. So it's the 4th annual. And so Casey Johnson does mention that he did win the NBA Community Assist Award in 2023. And so again, man, I think that kind of merges in with just the leadership, man, how much he gives back and everything else. And so you just want to see Ayo Dosunmu be successful. But that is the most updated talk here around Ayo Dosunmu, is that trade talks are cooling off. The Bulls are going to go ahead and likely have him on the roster moving forward, but we'll see what happens, obviously, as the season goes along, because it's a fluid situation. And so you guys let me know in the comments here, do you think that Ayo Dosunmu will be around here for the Chicago Bulls this season, or do you think that he's going to be traded? Remember, he is on an expiring contract at $7.5 million, I believe. Next, let me know what you guys are thinking here about Vooch. Is Vooch going to get bought out? Is Vooch going to be traded, perhaps here at the trade deadline? Or do you believe in my scenario, where I'm thinking that he is headed towards a Lonzo Ball type of situation, where they're going to get him on another contract, much more tradable contract, team friendly in the sense that maybe it has a team option here. And then we could be looking to see, I think, a 1-for-1 swap. And like I said, Caruso, he went to a contender. Lonzo Ball went to a contender. I'm thinking Vooch could end up on a contender that way. And so you guys let me know in the comments what you're thinking. And as we always say, look, go Bulls. And I will see you guys next one. All right, peace.